Greetings. You're listening to Guiding Stars Evolutionary Astrology Radio. This is your host, Kristin Fontana. And today I'm here with SΥmµn Vorster. We're discussing Saturn through the houses, in particular Saturn in Virgo or Saturn in the sixth house. We've been moving around that zodiac. And so if you've missed any prior shows and you know you have Saturn in one of those earlier signs, you can find us on the web on YouTube or through EA Zoom. So I'd like to welcome SΥmµn back. Welcome back, SΥmµn.
Thanks very much, Kristin. Glad to be back, as always.
And before we get going, if there's anything you'd like to announce, please do so.
Sorry, the computer sound just went out there for a second. What was that you had said?
Oh, if there's anything you would like to announce, go ahead and do so.
Yeah, just at the moment, quite a while ago, I created this this thing called Learn Your Chart, and it's basically a type of way of learning about your astrology chart where I recorded like a load of videos about the different planets and the different signs and what they meant evolutionary. And so what I do is I create a PDF with your chart, and I take your chart and I attach videos to all of the placements that you have in your chart. So you get 24 videos and a playlist in this PDF, and you click on, say if your Pluto's in the first house, you'll click on the little Pluto symbol in your chart in the PDF, and it will take you to the video, and you kind of learn about your chart in this way from an evolutionary perspective. And so I did that about 3 years ago, and it was done now in June, so it's a 3-year anniversary. So I'm really excited to, just like let people know that that's a very cool way to learn, to have an astrology reading where you get material first, you listen to it, you write down some questions, and then when you come and talk to me, you've got a familiarity of what your chart is. And so we can spend a lot more time learning about the nature of your chart versus trying to get versed in what that could mean for you. So you maximize the amount of time that you get learning about your chart. So that's actually on my website, www.raising, and then there's a hyphen, vibrations.com. And of course, there's a link in the description of this video as well. So yeah, that's what I just wanted to share. Just anybody that's interested in learning about their chart in a kind of very innovative and unique way.
Awesome. Thank you, SΥmµn. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we are discussing one specific area of astrology currently, looking at Saturn, in particular in Virgo or the sixth house. And as astrologers, we do not pick apart charts in this way. We don't just take one signature. We can't say that one size fits all. It's really important when you're doing evolutionary astrology that you move through the chart, starting with the Pluto paradigm, looking where the placement of Pluto is and the nodal axis, the rulers of those nodes. And there is a model, there's a method that SΥmµn and I use. It's the School of Evolutionary Astrology paradigm that Jeff Green founded. And there is a school, by the way, if anybody wants to get a hold of the whole process that SΥmµn and I have been trained under, and it's on the schoolofelevolutionaryastrology.com website. But today we are discussing Saturn, and we decided that Saturn would be a great topic this entire year, as we are all experiencing an enormous amount of Capricorn energy, with Saturn being the ruler for Capricorn. And we are also approaching a very big historical crossroads, astrologically speaking, in January of 2020, an entire stellium of planets in Capricorn. But
yeah,
this summer, right. Yeah, it's massive. And this, in ways that, I don't know if it's ever been that way. I'm sure it has, but so long ago, I don't know the dates. Rose Marcus might be a good person to ask for that. But so long ago. Long, many lifetimes ago. And so this summer in the Northern Hemisphere, I have to state, I know some of you are listening from other places, but we have Pluto and Saturn in Capricorn and the South Node in Capricorn, which connects to our past. So we're all feeling a lot of gravity, and a lot of circling back might be occurring. A lot of memories are surfacing, I know for me, that I haven't thought of for years. And so anything that feels unresolved or something that may feel like it's that you haven't dedicated enough time to, because with Saturn we think about really the building blocks of our life. It's connects to the container that houses your soul. It's the structural nature of consciousness. It has to do with how you organize your time, how you commit, who you commit to, and the energy that you carry along these lines. And so if you're born with Saturn in Virgo or the sixth house, we're going to talk to you today about what that feels like and how it manifests. And you can help other people who have the same signature understand it for themselves as well. But before we go straight into Virgo, SΥmµn, as always, I like to talk about Saturn as an archetype in particular, and then we can get more specific.
Right. Saturn as an archetype reflects to us the natural law of boundaries within our psyche and within the natural world, and so its function is to establish protection. Within nature, you can see it as the bark on the tree, or the shell on the crab, as an example, or the behavior of an animal looking after its young. It's a function that allows us to protect ourselves from the environment that is essentially, not necessarily trying to attack us in this way, but it definitely is about how we are being protected from the external forces, or its intention at least, and boundaries being the natural function as well. So what Saturn in Capricorn does through its function in the 10th house of establishing boundaries and drawing lines is also to allow for awareness to actually know that it is in existence. Otherwise, with everything being Neptune, there is no division. So Saturn actually plays out as an archetype of division, right? Drawing lines, and then the ability for us to see something within the totality of creation is through a frame, right? So if you look at your computer screen, for instance, or your mobile telephone, you'll notice that held within your phone or within your computer is a universe of multiple realities. But in order for you to know how to focus on the thing, there is a framework that supports, that kind of holds that perception in focus. So Saturn Capricorn 10th house is a frame that allows us to focus on something in which we can then digest the Neptune energy, or the nature of awareness in its non-dual state.
Oh, yeah, I love it. Right. Because consciousness, or your soul, will take the form also that it's contained within.
Mm-hmm.
As the bones and our skin and everything is holding in our soul in this form that we inhabit. And so the energy of Saturn, if you can imagine that Saturn connects to your skin and the bones and all that contains this body where your soul lives, the energy of Saturn is so important, so important. It's going to affect everything. Saturn conditions every planet in your chart. And it is like you're wrapping. It's like wrapping, wrapping yourself in that archetype, bathing in it in a sense. So also, if you have a retrograde Saturn, natal retrograde, currently Saturn is retrograde, transiting Saturn is retrograde, a lot different, actually, a more Uranian kind of energy or quality, in that your soul is going to be rebelling or rejecting anything that is status quo, the conditioning of our society. And so it does accelerates the process of individuation. And evolutionarily speaking, if you have Saturn retrograde, it can connect to removing one conditioning layer after the other with each experience that you invite into your life. So I would say if anyone has Saturn retrograde, it's a little bit like having Saturn in Aquarius, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, my daughter has Saturn retrograde, and to kind of emphasize the point about that the soul has a Uranian component to them. Uh, in evolutionary astrology, what we do is from Saturn onwards, if a planet is retrograde, we look to the next planet. So when Saturn's retrograde, we look to Uranus as a way to understand the context of Saturn in the chart. That's the first step. And then, what does that mean in terms of what your life looks like? And what I've observed so far is uh, Saturn retrograde souls will not necessarily understand the natural like construct of conditioning in the world that we exist within. There's an inherent sort of like, not necessarily an inability, but a like the relatability to the boundaries and rules in our world seem to be outdated or offbeat. And so what happens is they struggle to know what boundaries are, and that would be the Uranian aspect of it. And so the way to, or the path to finding one's own authority is to actually experiment with where the boundaries are. And through experimenting in life and learning where boundaries are, they get to define what they consider to be healthy and safe for them. And in that sense, it becomes the path of individuating one's own sense of authority. So the rejection to natural authority is um, a need to throw off another person's existential control so that they can then find the space, or not find the space, but be in a space to learn what is safe and not safe for them through the behavior of exploring that. So
Yeah, and Saturn retrograde, I'm sure she says, I'm the boss of me.
yeah,
Right?
totally, 100%.
And I am not conforming. I'm going to do it my way.
Yep,
So
100%.
don't. Oh, yeah. All right. So uh, another thing about a Saturn, yeah, my own boss for sure. And
It's just funny, I'm laughing because I think there were like 3 incidents today where that happened. So, you know,
really, in one
yeah.
day, that's amazing.
Hmm.
Saturn retrograde souls probably really are liking this Saturn retrograde transit, I have a feeling.
Yeah.
Uh, Saturn retrograde too can create a, gosh, this is just Saturn word, a brooding, a natural brooding, and they reserve the right to brood, which is essentially to dwell on a subject for a long time. And
Brilliant.
um, and Jeff used to say to meditate with morbid persistency.
I like
So
it. Very Saturn word there. Persistency and morbidness. It's like, will it ever happen? Is it ever going to change? Will this limitation be removed?
Now, if somebody though, keep talking about Saturn retrograde being this Uranian thing, and of course, 75% of our population is the consensus state.
Hmm.
So, if someone's in the consensus state, that Saturn retrograde will typically compensate by creating the appearance of of normalcy, the
Yes.
appearance of normalcy. But inside, they're just screaming. They're really wanting to rebel. So, I mean, of course, if they're in the individuated state, maybe your daughter is, she probably gets off at thumbing her nose at the system. 20% of our population, she'll probably be rebelling against her teachers, I'm
Yes.
sure, openly. So remember too that the compensation, which does definitely occur in the consensus state, it can spill for sure into the individuated. The compensation can lead to uh, what we call sickness in the skeleton, arthritis and back pain. It can degenerate into immune system problems. And if you think about it, and this is another Jeffrey statement, when he used to say, do you have any idea how much energy it takes to repress what is natural?
Yeah.
So
It's a
if the
lot.
soul, if you're in the consensus state and you're got Saturn retrograde, and anyone listening here, I'm sure, is not in the consensus state, but if you know anybody that is, and you're trying to help them in any way, understand, obviously all dis-ease is rooted in emotional unrest. There's a lot to do with what we're repressing, how much we're carrying. And so, someone with Saturn retrograde, it's important to know, or to observe in particular, and then you can know what evolutionary state they are in. Obviously, with Saturn retrograde in a spiritual state, somebody's going to be wanting to bring something more alternative and spiritual to the mainstream world, wanting to do that work in their own way. So, any other thoughts about that?
I mean, yeah, I suppose with Saturn retrograde just in itself, even though that's not really what we're talking about, so I don't mean to amplify the length of our conversation, but I felt it was really cool to share about, which was that, from a psychological and emotional perspective, the unconscious, the individual unconscious, is a Uranian theme. So these people also have a tendency, and when I say these people, I mean, because I remember you even have Saturn retrograde, don't you?
No, I don't.
Oh,
No, I
okay.
haven't. It's just aspecting it. It's aspecting everything.
All right.
That's all. Same thing.
Right, right. Well, there's a tendency to be very aware of subconscious emotional repression within their psyche. That there's like the floodgates from the Uranian field through to the physical realm where emotional processing occurs is a lot more stronger. So if you do have this type of symbolism, a lot of the time you'll find sort of random outbursts of emotion coming to the surface, and uh, that can be because that, like I said, the gate between Saturn and Uranus is open. There's a flow there, and there's an intention there to actually work through whatever's been repressed. I've also noticed that with Saturn retrograde souls, that when emotion comes to the surface, it might not necessarily have well, it acts Uranian. It's erratic, and there is a purpose for that emotion to come to the surface in this lifetime. I've seen at least. So
Definitely.
interesting.
Yeah, I agree. One last thought before we get into the Virgo archetype relative to this is that when when Saturn is retrograde, it's like a doorway to that soul's liberation. There's a door that, it represents a doorway, obviously, to Uranus, right? The next archetype, the next sign, the next house. And it is about recovering your freedom. Wherever you felt limited or bound by something, there is an inner rebellion. And there's a doorway, in essence, that your soul is needing to walk through. And so it is, a real life of deconditioning, for sure. And we're all experiencing the Saturn retrograde right now. And so if there's any area of your life where you felt like you've been conforming or too conditioned, you're going to be wanting to throw all that off at this point. And lastly, I remember too having some clients with Saturn retrograde where they had a near-death experience. And this then kept them connected to the other side right after the fact. So if you have a near-death experience and you've experienced that astral plane, which is a Uranian phenomena, Uranian energy, and then you carry that, and then you've had this experience, obviously still now living on this earth, then it's going to change the way you experience being here on this earth. In fact, in two cases that I remember, they end up being hospice workers, which I think is just so awesome.
Yeah,
And I,
completely. That's exactly what I meant by that. Spot on. Like totally.
and so yeah, there's retrograde planets wherever they are, but in particular Saturn, they will break down that barrier between the conscious and the unconscious mind, so the images can come forth. We're alluding to that, speaking of that in a moment ago. So, it's important planet to have, or energy to have through transit, so we can all experience more of that as well, and let go of the things that we've been holding on to. And with Saturn and Virgo, gosh, the Saturn retrograde, if you're Saturn retrograde in Virgo, there's a need to rewire the brain, rewire the thought process. So you're not beating yourself up so much, because Virgos, can be their own worst enemy, really hard on themselves, perfectionists, and comparing themselves to their idea of perfection through the polarity, which is Pisces ruled by Neptune. So to have that retrograde says, okay, I'm going to create a counter thought to that thought I just had and make it a positive one, something that's more promoting versus degrading. And so I feel it's really important if that natal Saturn is retrograde in Virgo, to be able to do that, to rewire the brain. So it's serving you and not hurting you. All
Yeah,
right, so that's, yeah.
completely.
So Saturn in Virgo, or the sixth house. Of course, the sixth house is naturally a Virgo house. So if you have Saturn in some other sign and it sits in the sixth house, you're going to be able to really relate to some of what we're saying today. All right, where do you want to take it from here, SΥmõn?
I would say that Saturn from a soul perspective, and also wants to. It's showing us where we're going to emotionally mature in this lifetime, and in a sense become our own sovereign sort of the captain of our own vessel. So with Saturn in the sixth house, or wherever you've got Saturn, it's suggesting that holistically with the rest of your chart, because there's always going to be a reason for why Saturn would be sitting in a house, and how that's supporting the overall structure of the chart. But this is an area of your life where Saturn's firstly it's an earth sign, Saturn, Capricorn, and it's in an earth sign, sixth house of Virgo. So there seems to be a very strong emphasis on emotional development around practicality, and
Yeah.
specifically, coming into the world and dealing with things in life where chaos seemed to have been a large factor in your upbringing, or in some way, shape, or form, just around you. And so what I've noticed in my work is that with Saturn in the sixth souls, one of the maturing paths for the soul in this lifetime is to progressively break free from psychological immaturity linked to laziness. And now I don't mean laziness in a condescending sense like, oh, you're lazy. It's more like the sensitivity to being overwhelmed, and then not being able to sort of clear out and or become organized in chaos. So one of the things is to feel victimized in life. This is kind of the shadow. So all of our planets reflect a transition from a shadow element to the more higher expression of it, and we've all got this. We that's what it means to psychologically move through these planetary energies until we reach a point of empowerment in them. And so, and again, there are exceptions to the rule. For instance, if you've got beautiful trines happening to your Saturn, and mom showed up in your life as somebody that was really super organized and stuff, but either way, it's a need to see empowerment and emotional like flow in your life through getting into a routine that supports a structure in your life that gets you to be more fluid and more effective with your time and energy.
Right.
And that is represented actually through the natural trine between Virgo and Capricorn. And I've got a sort of natural zodiac over here that I can share that with when we get to that point. But it's something that I've seen with a tremendous amount of souls, that path of maturation with Saturn in the sixth is to really find a discipline or find a pattern in your life that allows you to clear away and get things put into organization, so that you're using your time more effectively and not wasting energy in trying to put out small fires, as an example, or trying to deal with things that seem to be all over the place. And it doesn't have to be something that's wrong with you, and I don't think that's the case, but there is definitely early life conditioning, or mom or dad, or whatever was influential in your life at the time, where there was a crisis in this area. And another thing that kind of adds to that, because there's so much to talk about with this sign, I've already studied it pretty in depth, is somebody within your life struggled to have healthy boundaries. And this can be sort of argued as a seventh house Saturn dynamic as well. But in the sixth house, this can also reveal a crisis in being assertive in what is your comfortability in what is safe for you and not safe for you. Like again, Saturn reflects this protection. So you may have had, say, a parent that was unable to, or you didn't feel protected by them on some level. This could also be a Saturn in the 10th house thing, and so there was a kind of like lack or a crisis in authority growing up, and that led to you struggling to, or not having the comfort or the strength to put yourself in a position of authority, because maybe a sense of lack or an insecurity or a feeling of imperfection, or just a lack of knowing how to assert yourself. Like, and so that can become an overwhelming thing where you psychologically desire things of a dream and you want to materialize and you want to manifest on some level, and yet the ability to really get the process going can be hampered by an insecurity or a feeling that really wasn't established early on in life. So that's where it comes back down to that thread again of, you have to kind of, with Saturn in the 6th house, from what I've observed, and this goes for all the states, is to really find that routine or step-by-step process in your life that helps you build in a direction that can give you that authority in essence, And the last thing I wanted to share was that one of the ways that can show up is somebody that can actually believe or want to do something with their life and study everything, but never actually make the plunge into the thing because of a fear of not knowing enough, as an example.
Not being ready, not feeling ready, and so procrastinating. But I even remember when I was getting into this work, and I completely felt that way. And Jeffrey said, "You'll never feel ready, so just do it." My sun sign sits in the 6th house, so you're never going to be perfect, but I promise you that God will you will attract people, or God will only send people that you can help. And it typically, obviously it happens that way energetically. We attract people that are working on things we might have already worked on, right? Just a little bit ahead. So it's very common with Saturn and Virgo that they'll never feel ready enough for something, but you have to just put yourself in motion. My favorite example of the 6th house archetype, Virgo, as well, is the Taoist philosophy of the centipede. It's got these 500 legs, and it's fine as long as it's moving, puts itself in motion, like that Nike ad, just do it. But as soon as that centipede starts to analyze what one of his legs is doing, leg number 46, it becomes paralyzed and it freezes. So this overthinking of something, fixating on something, that creates a paralysis, so you don't follow through on what you really want to be doing. And so that's probably the biggest tripping point with Saturn and Virgo, or the 6th house, is either not feeling worthy of something or ready, prepared enough, for sure.
That's right. And there's a very crucial point in the psychological empowerment process with Saturn in the 6th house, where you realize that the natural orientation to seeing reality is to get bogged down in the details. And fluidity and flow is a very crucial part of the polarity to Virgo, which is Pisces, right? So another aspect of the healing of the wounds that potentially could show up for Saturn in the 6th house is never feeling that you are what's the word, like that you can do things wrong, and so there's an inherent kind of guilt around judgment or persecution. And again, this can manifest itself as a patriarchal father figure, or a conditioned mother dynamic. And again, I only reference these two because those are the very influential people in our lives, that whether they are conscious of that conditioning or not is not the point. It's just what was really shaping your psyche at a young age that then becomes the underlying relationship to how you perceive the world, is what I'm really looking at. And so with that 6th house dynamic, an underlying sense of guilt that I'm not good enough, or I can't, like you said, I can't do this. and focusing on the negative to the point where it becomes a paralysis. And so that paralysis that then leads to not being able to do something or to feel good enough. And so you really have to work with part of the thing, I think, with I really, really advocate this a lot, actually, because I truly believe in its importance. And that is that when you're working with Saturn consciously in your chart, wherever it sits in your chart, there is a need to understand the relationship that Saturn plays to your Uranus opposition. And that is that in your Uranus opposition, you're going through a second spiritual birth, or you're going through a second birth, and that's spiritual. And in order to have the emotional maturity to deal with the changes that will take place for you at a spiritual and psychological stage at your 40s, a very grounded Saturn maturation process needed to occur between your Saturn return and Uranus opposition. So Saturn becomes a path of individuation. And it also houses your individuality, because at some point you will need to have an understanding that Uranus opposition requires you to have trust and faith in yourself and security in yourself. Can you be your own parent? So with Saturn in the 6th house, work to, and again, to give yourself the best potential in your Uranus opposition, not saying that it's absolutely necessary, but I would say that it is very evident in people's lives that having that structure in place in your Saturn return between in your 30s gives you a very strong footing to bounce off into your Uranus individuation process. And so that Saturn work with 6th house stuff is firstly self-acceptance. Like a very, very big polarity understanding of Virgo is self-acceptance and healing your emotional self, because when you do self-acceptance, what you do is you begin to take things less personally, which again, with 6th house Saturn stuff, you're going to have a natural sensitivity to criticism, which leads you to an idea of, okay, well, and I've got a slide over here that really talks to this archetype, that criticism in its underdeveloped, or the psychology of Saturn in an underdeveloped state, criticism becomes a vehicle for reaffirming your self-worth. And in this case, it's a lack of self-worth. It's very subtle, but these are very profound little things that if you really excavate the archaeology of your emotional development with your Saturn, you'll see these things appear. So like we were talking with Saturn in the 5th house, it's the potential to become narcissistic, because there's an inability to love yourself with Saturn in the 5th. And so therefore it can become like bending reality in order for it to work in accordance with your way. And you think, yeah, anyway, so the 6th house here is working firstly on really, really understanding self-acceptance, that we all are imperfect. And that if we measure ourselves against this ideal of perfection, we're always going to create the psychology of we're imperfect, which is something that I think with the Virgo constellation is deeply, deeply ingrained within the collective psyche because of the nodes, the sort of, Virgo Pisces age, as it were. I don't want to go too deep into it. But so there's an inherent sensitivity to imperfection and judgment and criticism, and the ability to handle that as a way for self-improvement, because that's the thing about Virgo, is that it at a psychological stage, it is seeking perfection, not through the ideal of perfection, but seeking perfection as a way of improving. It's like getting better at things, like becoming more refined, as it were, so that the quality of the process is more digestible. It provides deeper understanding of things, so the quality of a book, for instance, is very much dictated based on the person's capacity to write in certain ways and the research that they do in it and stuff. And when you read and digest something that's been written through something that's got quality in it, you tend to be more, happy about what you've digested. It improved your life. So the Virgo archetype wants to improve things. So with Saturn in the 6th house, attracting criticism is a natural product of readjusting one's imperfections or sort of need for growth, emotional growth, so that you can then really, improve one's life. And so if you're working on your Saturn and self-acceptance, you're able to accept more critique in a way that is healthy for your emotional growth than it is for rejecting it and being very defensive about it. And honestly, this is one thing that I don't have Saturn in the 6th house, but I've got Mars and Venus in Virgo there. And that's one thing that I've definitely had to work through emotionally, to be able to experience becoming good at things, as it were. And I think with Saturn in the 6th house, your work, as well as your ability to become an authority figure in your life as you mature, is rooted very much in your capacity to improve. And again, not coming from a place of lack, but a place of refinement.
Yeah, I definitely feel when we think about Virgo in the 6th house, there's a tendency to focus on what's lacking or broken or missing. There could be 90% good going on when you're focusing on the 10%, which is important to understand the power of your thoughts. I mean, that's why there's a self-improvement that's always in progress. But my two favorite things when I think about Virgo, one is, Jeffrey used to say that we're all in a state of becoming. So whether you've got Saturn in the 6th or not, every one of us is really, we're all in that same process of becoming who we are. And as you said, nobody is perfect. Even God isn't perfect. God is an evolving energy. And so the tendency for Virgos to compare their imperfection to perfection keeps them locked in this mindset that they'll never be enough. But what I feel is really important about the Virgo archetype, and I do love the Virgo archetype when it's operating in a healthy way. It is absolutely one of my favorite energies. It's just, there's so service oriented. There's such a natural humility that is so beautiful. All the greatest masters of our time carry that kind of quality. Really me? Instead of being full of themselves, they're completely humble. And so I do love the archetype of Virgo. And in terms of their own growth, what's helpful, I think, really is to have, of course, for the progress of what they're after, what you are after, is to have something measurable that you're experiencing. Even if you say to yourself, I'm going to meditate for 20 minutes every morning when I wake up. I mean, it's important to have certain things on your list of things to do that make you feel like you have been productive in any given day. And you can measure your success even within a path of meditation, because you can experience yourself gaining more from that experience, even from something that really doesn't feel measurable in a Virgo sort of way. You can feel it in your body, in your being. So having something that you can go to every day that helps to elevate, get you out of your mind, for sure, I think is really important for 6th house Saturn or Saturn in Virgo. But also to have activities in your life that are measurable. If it's exercise or eating properly or studying something. And also to focus on the things that are working. Focus on the things that you do know, that you do have at times, not just what is missing. So that's the square to Sagittarius. Sagittarius will look at life with the glass half full, and the Saturn in Virgo, or the 6, will look at life, or their life, as the glass half empty. So to really make sure that there's a focus too, and a acknowledgement of the things that are working, the things that are beautiful about you, or the things that are that you're proud of, the things that you have accomplished in your life. Is as important as working on the things that you want to improve.
Yeah, exactly. And two things that I wanted to share about Saturn 6th house stuff is there is the natural tendency to look at the imperfections as a product of Saturn or Virgo's energy, because it's looking to create wholeness, right? It's looking for that fluidity, and so any bumps or gaps in the road it wants to point out, because Virgo is an archetype of also revealing to us where there's crisis that leads to a confrontation, that leads to change, right? So, and we know this through the natural yod between Virgo and Aries, and Scorpio and Aries, and the sextile to Scorpio. So, of course, growth naturally occurs with the sixth house energy. So having Saturn in the sixth house, you are also more likely to find yourself in types of occupations where helping people become growing into the best version of themselves is something that you naturally find. And one of the ways to the transition into that makes you successful is the encouragement of being the best version of yourself. That's where Virgo hears and it's such a like really, really beautiful way to see Virgo, because it seems like sometimes it can be very difficult to grasp Virgo as an archetype. But what I see Virgo is, and kind of like close your eyes and imagine what I'm talking about here, is Virgo is that point where the next phase in something that is growing is needing to happen. So like with a baby, for instance, right? There's a step-by-step process. You don't see the feet of a baby form before the heart, or that the head doesn't form before the left toe, as an example. There's an inherent intelligence in the manifestation of how things operate or how things build. And so the building blocks of reality is how I perceive Virgo, which is why the idea of a step-by-step process is associated with it, at least from my point of view. And it's that point where just as the next thing comes into form, there has to be an absence of something. And it's the sensitivity between the absence of it and what has already formed, which is why there's an inherent lack. Again, these are my own kind of like intuitive reflections on the archetype. So Virgo can say, oh, there's something wrong here. Or it can say, this is the next step that makes the most amount of sense through the principle of natural creative intelligence. And so as we do step-by-step processes, if you find yourself in a routine that is fluid, you watch what happens in your day, you find yourself flow. Whereas the crisis can come because maybe you're taking like aspects of time, cycles of time, because remember the trine to Capricorn is Capricorn is all about the cycles as well, right? How long things take. So if you choose to do this action before this action, then if you didn't time it correctly in that sense, then you can experience more of a crisis of conflict within times. Whereas if you see the principle of what seems to be in priority and you can sense that, then you can make choices that then eventually reveal flow, because everything just works in terms of accordance of time. And I think Saturn in the sixth house can really tune into that at a very profound level. And it's a supportive process. It's like, okay, right, this is the next step. Okay, it's proactive, because that's the one thing I hate about the Virgo archetype in the sense of its development right now that really, really keeps us paralyzed. And we've spoken about this, is the need to focus on the lack and then to keep the lack as an imperfection. So it's like, oh, this is wrong and you should do better than this. It's a judgment on the reinforcement of somebody's stupidity. And so, like, with people, for instance, and I want to focus on this slide over here. Let me just get the annotation in. Here it is. And again, I have a natural sensitivity to this in my own personal chart, but I want to focus on this one. It says, failure should be our teacher, not our undertaker. Failure is a delay, not a defeat. It is a temporary detour, not a dead end. Failure is something we can avoid only by saying nothing, doing nothing, and being nothing. It's like so many of us are trapped in the Virgo imperfection archetype because we're so afraid of failure. And I think Saturn in sixth house potentially could have that dynamic in which it's the need to want to be the best version of themselves, but fear, because Saturn is fear as well. Fear getting things wrong because you were told it was wrong, or you were stupid, or how could you do that? And so that criticism becomes an internalized critic in that sense. And so it's like failure as an option to grow. So it's like, oh, we we try to do this, it didn't work. What did we do wrong here? And that's where Virgo comes in. It's like, okay, what aspect of this thing did we miss, this detail or thing? And then how do we reorganize that and then try again so that we can achieve success? And that's growth. That's a healthy psychological way of healing the Virgo archetype, and Saturn particularly there.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I love this other quote as well. If you look long enough into the void begins to look back through you. Oh, that doesn't scare you into changing, your approach. I don't know what.
But that's what Jeffrey talked about. Remember when he was talking about Saturn and Virgo souls, he'd be like, those are the people that are just staring into the void. And so because they're staring into the void, they're like, okay, I got to keep busy, because if I don't keep busy, then I'm just staring into the void and there's nothing there. And I hate that feeling. So let's just create another 100 lists.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Exactly. It's brilliant.
Wow. Well, let's look at some charts here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So this is the chart of the famous singer, Lady Gaga, right?
Yeah. I love this because as we were talking about before this webinar started, I think of Virgo, you think of this simple soul who's going to be doing, not this big Leonian life, so to speak, maybe really service oriented or helping in a healthcare field. And then you have to look at the whole chart. This is why you cannot pick apart one symbol in a chart and make it work for everyone. Here we've got Pluto and the moon and the south node all in the fifth, which reflects an enormous life on stage. And of course, a very faded life with Pluto on the south node. She's come back here, Lady Gaga, to get her power back as a woman in the world, stopping for nothing. Look at that trine to Jupiter. Oh my gosh. And right on the midheaven.
Right.
What a chart. Mars trining the north node. I mean, this is inevitable. But she is totally a workaholic. Anybody who's ever talked to her, worked with her, I mean, she works harder than anybody in her midst, and she expects others to do the same. She wants them there working hard with her. And her performances are unmatched, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw her when she was the halftime show act for the Super Bowl a few years back. Oh my gosh, it was out of this world, really. I mean, she was flying. I don't know what else. It was an incredible show. So that does not feel like a sixth house show for me, right? It's the fifth house that's coming in through here. But in Sagittarius, she's such a teacher through her performance, and she does speak to the underdog or those that feel different, right? Saturn retrograde, there it is. Like she's completely rebelling against consensus, right? Yeah. So she's speaking to the Uranian crowd and to the underdog crowd. I know how you feel. And so this is an excellent example. And she's been a huge international success, which of course he knows. You can see that with the Saturn in Sagittarius.
Well, like things to add, yeah. So how the first thing is she released the documentary about her life, and I find it just really, really fascinating that this kind of occurs while the Jupiter is transiting over her Pluto, her moon, and her south node, right? This whole entire process of putting the documentary together and revealing a lot about her life. And she reveals for the first time in this documentary to the general public this illness, this chronic illness that she has. And that's why, when we were talking about this chart beforehand, to me, it was really, really a good opportunity to also reveal that she has this chronic illness that she has that, plagues her a lot. And in the documentary, you actually witness her, the amount of pain that she's in, the suffering in. Sometimes she's actually unable to even do the things. And she was doing a show, and leading up to the show, the experience of her wanting to or being able to do the show was uncomfortable, very, very uncomfortable for her. She'd spent a lot of time not being in that creative process. And I see that Jupiter square the Saturn archetype there, where when she got to do and sit down and play the piano and do the thing that she was just so in love with, which is her creative performance, you could see that her relationship to what she was creating magically was on her face. It was like, or afterwards at least, you could see that she loved it so much, but she was also aware of how that illness in itself affects her capacity to just really do it all the time. So like you talked about this workaholic dynamic, and that Saturn really, really slows her down a lot into almost like a necessity to breathe a bit. And I'm not saying that this is what her soul's trying to do, but it's very clear in the documentary that it shows her that she does this thing that she loves, but it also slows her down to just breathe and take a moment's notice of reality and kind of take it in and not be overextending herself.
Well, I'm sure the fibromyalgia, I can't even say it. How do you pronounce that? Myalgia?
Yeah.
Fibromyalgia, yeah. Is a result of the excessive use of her hands. Practice, right?
Yes,
and
yes.
It's got to be a result of the hard pounding on those keys and over and over and over again. I mean, of course, it's a result of overuse, and so there is a need to just create more space in her life for herself to recover. That is here we go again. We've got Saturn, Jupiter retrograde in Sagittarius. This is Saturn retrograde in her chart.
Yeah.
But it is Jupiter retrograde is about the need to really create space for the things that that will allow us to grow and expand, right? To clear out the things that are not good for us or healthy for us or don't serve us any longer or have reached the roof of their the limit of what we need them to be in our life anymore, whatever it is. And so how long ago was that interview? I'm wondering.
The documentary?
The documentary. Or when did she do that?
2018. It was
Okay,
released.
that was recent then.
Right. So
I mean,
Jupiter.
you can see the Uranus transit, had come over her Venus, which was the ruler of her north node. Then Uranus came over her north node, really reflecting this need to change her ways.
Sure.
The fibromyalgia has a lot to do with the nerves, and that's an 11th house phenomena. And Uranus, of course, connects directly to the nervous system.
Yep.
This Uranus transit's not going to be easy here for a while. I mean, it is trining her Neptune, which can really, here it is, accelerate her life even further. That Neptune rules the North Node. It also can promote more healing. I mean, things just got huge for her when she entered the movie world now with her recent role, a Barbra Streisand movie. Help me.
Yeah, I don't actually remember or don't know.
Horrible. It'll come to me. But anyway, she just, won some big awards in films. She's not just hitting it out of the park in music, and of course she's singing in this film. But
didn't she do a I think it's called the duet with Bradley something?
Yes, exactly. Bradley Cooper.
Yeah.
And so he created the film, and I think he wrote all of the music as well for it, and he's saying A Star Is Born. Finally, I can't believe, how could I forget that? We're talking about the stars here. A Star Is Born, yeah. And so he created all the music for it. It was new music, and yes, they did a duet, and they just.
If you listen to the lyrics of that song that they did together, it's actually pretty profound to understand the Saturn and sixth house dynamic there as well, because there's a lot of like, especially the introduction, you can see where there is a need for growing emotionally. Like there's a really deep confrontational, emotional kind of like maturing in our ability as a human race to go beyond our own narcissism. It's really fascinating to listen to the lyrics and to really hear what they're actually trying to say there in their conversation together.
Yeah, I mean, the title of the song is called Shallow, which is exactly how I did post this in my newsletter when it first came out, I was just blown away when I first heard this song.
Yep.
Um, she says, I'm off the deep end. Watch as I dive in. I'll never meet the ground. Crash through the surface where they can't hurt us. We're far from the shallow now. So the song isn't about this limitation. It's about going to the depths of something, right? We're far from the shallow now. We're in the past. Of course, there had been that experience of not being able to go there. So um, she says, I'm falling. In all the good times, I find myself longing for change. And in the bad times, I fear myself. Tell me something, boy. Aren't you tired of trying to fill that void?
Right? You see it?
Yeah, or do you need more? Or do you need more? Ain't it hard keeping it so hardcore? Yeah, I think this song was really written for a Saturn in the 6th house.
Pretty
So
crazy.
yeah, that's a great song.
Mm-hmm.
So here we see this chart just blows me away every time I look at it. Every direction she's got these just trines that are can just keep her going till the end of her time here. But with Uranus trining her Neptune, of course, the ruler of her midheaven, or Jupiter, her Mercury.
Yeah.
Neptune has to do with film and taking things in just to another stratosphere. And so, of course, she's, got a hunger to do it all, right? She's got all that 5th house energy where the well can never, you can feel like you're never getting enough. No project, no experience could ever fill that void. There's a void that 5th house people feel as well as the 6th house, being that they're trying to fill their life with things outside of themselves, an experience, a lover, what have you. When that void can only be filled by the internal journey, by connecting within ourselves and through extension what created us. Nothing can touch that void. It's all temporary. Anything that we go after, whether it's that relationship or however we might try and actualize ourselves in the world, it is ever so temporary. And we only feel it in fleeting moments until we have that experience. What's next? It's like we can never have more. You've got the first kiss happens and it will never happen again, right? There's only one first kiss. And then you've got to replace that experience or that longing for something with something else. That experience of unconditional love, which is what she is, her soul ultimately is needing to experience and find. I'm sure she's like her toughest critic, is part of.
Oh yeah, completely. You can see that in the documentary, very much so.
And I know her relationship life has sort of been a disaster. She talks about that, and just tough. A lot of, in part because she's really married to her work, I think is a big part of it.
Yep, that's right. That's right. Okay. One of the things that's very evident about Saturn opposed Chiron over here as well is that she, and maybe even Neptune in the 7th house, is that what was Lady Gaga originally kind of seen through in the public eye? She was a singer in that sense, but she also created an incredible amount of shock to the sort of general consensus in the music industry, with the way that she would dress, the way that she would express herself in ways that was very offbeat and different, and that would attract such sort of confusion and praise, but also at the same time a lot of criticism as well. And she had to deal with how people perceived her expression as, because she had done some really radical things that, to her was probably done on purpose, but to people that couldn't understand that, they were definitely trying to sort of repress that or judge that, to say that, why is this person doing that?
Exactly. All right. Do you want to say some more about Gaga, or do you want to move to?
Yeah, I think we can move to the next chart, because I think we're coming to the end of our conversation today.
Right.
So let's have a look.
All right, here's an actual Saturn in Virgo. Wow, on the North Node, Venus and the Sun. Wow.
Right?
Wow. Okay, you know this person, so you go ahead and share the
Yeah,
pearls.
I find this interesting with the South Node in the second and the first house in Pisces, and then Neptune here. It's it's squaring the nodal axis, and then you got a lot of seventh house stuff. You know, um,
Mm-hmm.
and I find it interesting that the nature of this, and then you got Pluto there also in Libra, that it's it's trying to find clarity and correction and specificness in relationships, right? Learning how to find a balance between what's fair and what's not fair, as an example, and how to navigate in this world with that Neptune in the 10th squaring it, going, well, what is true and what's not true, as an example. And what was really interesting with the soul is that when Pluto transited over their Neptune, they had an experience where the Pluto transit Neptune was so intense that it brought through memories from the deep unconscious to the awareness of the soul, that was so intense that it actually created a crisis in which their perception of reality had opened up. So it was almost like a Kundalini awakening experience. And then what happened was that as they kind of went into the world to try to navigate it, the relationships that they formed couldn't be false anymore. So there was like this real sort of crisis in relationships in which they could see beyond the veil, and it led to a kind of almost like an escapism to deal with the intense Virgo energy, which was the realization of all of the kind of imperfections and the ways that patriarchy had set itself up, and all of the false like illusions that people tell themselves about, and they believe the things that they believe in about themselves, and it was such an intense awakening of the experience that it actually materialized that Saturn and Virgo, it was like the void was there for this person,
Wow.
and they needed
Yeah.
to reconcile the ability to come back into the world in a way where they could integrate that perception with not in a way that was very proactive. And
Mm-hmm.
this happened around, I think, 2003 2002 as an example. So it's only now, and in sort of like the later parts of 2015 2016, does the world kind of catch up to this collective idea of, I think it was Pluto and Scorpios, where there's a lot of repressed emotion and feelings and non-transparency and non-honesty, and so now that awakening becomes more relevant and real, and so there's a more integration and service to help others become clear about their own selves. But in a sense, just witnessing everybody in a crisis, but not being able to relate or share that insight, because nobody was able to see that because they were too busy in their own lives avoiding their own truth or their own pain and such. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure in other times that would have been true for this soul too, right? Uh, to not dealing with the Virgo stuff in their life,
sure.
wanting to escape in other ways, and so coming into this life and having that experience, and then you can see the Saturn sextiling Mars on one side, sextiling Uranus on the other. There's a real integration
Yep.
through sexuality, through this Kundalini experience. You've got that 8th house Pluto, so they're integrating all of what they've experienced, and then, like you said, they're able to, they're living in the void or witnessing the void in others, and trying to, are they working with people in this way as a result?
Yeah, now. Yeah, exactly. Because there's kind of like a need for it, or a recognition of it. And so the realization of that Saturn work becomes something that now becomes of service, whereas before it was a crisis of, what's the point in talking?
Right.
Because nobody understands each other. This is a crisis in relationships. It's like, do you really understand what you're talking about? Is there really a connection over there? And so, true story.
Well, what's the point in talking when nobody's listening? I mean, that's
Yep.
part of the 7th house too, and or they're not hearing what I'm saying.
Yes.
For
Yes.
people to really hear us, they have to have been there
Mhm.
themselves, and things have to be bad enough before they'll be knocking on their door.
Yeah.
In this case, But definitely, I love this chart in terms of somebody who has a capacity to really deal with the root of anything. And too, with Uranus and then the moon conjunct that Uranus trining. It's a wide trine with the moon, but Uranus and the moon trining that Mars in the 5th house. So very powerful chart.
Yeah, and the one last thing to say about this, which is also really interesting, is that the soul attracts a lot of people in a state of crisis.
Yeah.
And so they kind of like help them navigate through their own crisis because they're aware of their own, like, so a lot of people like find themselves in crisis and then kind of like call on the soul to help them. And I think that's that Pluto dynamic again, where there's an underlying realization of getting to the root of it and then helping liberate themselves from their own crisis.
Well, they've definitely been trying to save people in other lifetimes with the South Node in Pisces, right? And the ruler Neptune is squaring the nodes.
Yeah.
And they became so swept away and lost or taken over by everybody else's problems, right? That they lost themselves potentially in the process, or ended up in relationships that were out of balance because of just wanting to help or save somebody. But in this life, when you've got Uranus with the moon, Uranus rules the whole chart, there's there's some distance and more objectivity. And there's memories with your Uranian element, right, that live in the cells of the body. I don't want to do that again. But that need to resolve that Neptune square the nodes. I need to have strong boundaries, right, with Saturn and Virgo, be more discerning. What am I going to take in? When am I going to give? When am I not going to give? How much am I going to give? And knowing that just a little can be enough. You don't have to give them the whole enchilada. You don't have to give them everything, or you'll lose yourself in the process. So this is a big life for sure for this soul. And that Saturn in Virgo definitely is about giving people morsels, not the whole thing, or allowing people to just work on one step at a time and seeing how powerful the small pieces are to the whole.
Exactly.
And, yeah, this is a great example too of Saturn and Virgo. Love it. All right, SΥmµN. Well, we need to close this hour. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone, to touch base with SΥmµN, raising-vibrations.com for readings or his school. And you know where to find me. It was so great to connect with you again, SΥmµN. We'll be back next month discussing Saturn and Libra, or Saturn in the 7th house. And I'll look forward to reconvening with you then. Until next time, namaste.